sat at my window last evening. The letterman brought unto me a little gilt-edged invitation, saying you'll wholly come over to tea. Sure, I knew that the Fogarty sent it, so I went just for old friendship's sake, and the first thing they gave me...
Good morning. My name is Stephen Cook Kernan. We're here today to celebrate the 201st or the 202nd anniversary of the publication of A Visit from St. Nicholas, or 'Twas the Night Before Christmas, by Clement Moore, who was a cousin to Mary Eliza McVicker Constable. Well, my father's mother was Elizabeth Cook Constable Kernan, and she told us that the poem was originally presented to Mary Eliza's 5 children as a Christmas gift. This is a family lore, and to tell you all about Constable's connection to 'Twas the Night Before Christmas is Loraine O'Donnell, Executive Director of Constable Hall. Thank you.
Thank you, Stephen. I'm going to attempt to not use the microphone. Am I loud enough back there? Yeah. Am I good? At any time, if you need me to hop on the mic, just give a yell and tell me. Great, thank you. All right, so as I was introduced, my name is Loraine O'Donnell, Executive Director of Constable Hall. I was born and grew up in Boonville, New York. And then I went on to college for theater and kind of was a performer all over the country for a lot of years. Moved back here a couple years ago to kind of semi-retire, and I was looking for a retirement job. And so I was looking, on Facebook, this pops up, Executive Director of Constable Hall. And I said, what the hell is Constable Hall? I'm embarrassed to say that I grew up 10 minutes from Constable Hall and never knew it existed. So now, that is one of the reasons I love my job, is because I get to correct that. I get to tell everybody the amazing site that is Constable Hall and all the amazing history that we have within the hall. Now, yes, I am going to talk about the 'Twas the Night Before Christmas and its association, but I also want to give you a little early history, because I truly believe that we are going to get more people to the hall because of our involvement with 'Twas the Night Before Christmas. But I also believe that once we get people to the hall, they're going to fall in love with it for the reason I'm about to tell you about the history. So, let's start here. So we like to call the house that inspired the poem. Now, if you go to Wikipedia or anywhere else on the worldwide interweb, there are several different versions of how the poem is connected to the house. But we at the museum, we understand that there is family lore attached, like Stephen just told you. He was told as a child that Clement Moore wrote it for Mary Eliza's children as a gift. Now, that is one of many stories that happens. So the things I'm going to tell you today are they're things we like to think of as evidence to prove that we at least have a connection to it. So I am not going to say it was written for the hall. I'm not going to say it was written at the hall. We say part of it was inspired by the hall. We really believe we do have some evidence and examples to back that up. So first, we're going to talk about the history. 3 generations in Ireland. So the family originated in England and then moved to Ireland. So they moved to Ireland and lived south of Dublin for 2 generations, and then they moved north to Dublin, where John Constable, the surgeon, was born. Now, the Constable family, they really liked the names William and John. They loved naming their boys William and John. So much so that we give all the Williams and all the Johns nicknames to keep them separate, because there were about 12 Williams and around a dozen Johns as well. So this first John, we call him, so it's John Constable, we call him John the Surgeon. So that's how we keep them set. So John's son is William Constable Sr. So he was born and educated in Ireland. And then his family moved to the United States so that his father, John, the surgeon, could serve as a surgeon in the French and Indian War. So the family was also in trade. They were in trade, import-export. They also were in the fur trade as well. So they moved their family, they moved the business to New York City. So when they settled in New York City, this was of the 1700s. So he made several friends. I mean, they were a very financially well-off family. So back then, actually still today, different classes, right? People deal with like individuals, upper class families with a certain amount of wealth. So they traveled in these kind of circles. Now, they were an import-export when they were in Ireland as well. So we like to think that the family had a very global way of thinking about the world, because they had, in being an import and export, they dealt with all different kinds of people, different cultures, different languages. So they had a real global way of thinking when it came to dealing with people, and especially, and we'll talk about this in a minute, Native Americans. Because they were in the fur trading business, they had, business-wise, they had to have a great relationship with Native Americans. But think of Native Americans' relationship with white people in the 17 and 1800s. You don't think of it great right away, do you? No. But the Constable family was different. And again, we think that's because of their global way of thinking. So we're going to talk about that later. So when William Sr. was in New York City, news about the American Revolution started bubbling. And being a businessman, he didn't want to choose sides right away. He kind of wanted to sit back and kind of see how everything was going to land. Until his good friend Benedict Arnold got in some trouble. Then he thought maybe he should choose sides, and he did. He enlisted, and he became an aide-de-camp to General Lafayette, and he rose to national prominence again as the import-exporter. And by the way, he was one of the first people to have established trade with China and India to this country. So you could blame him or thank him for that. So let's see. So he was also friends within being in the ranks of General Lafayette. He became very good friends with George and Martha Washington, with Baron von Steuben, Aaron Burr, as I said, Benedict Arnold. And also something to note, his close friend and lawyer was Alexander Hamilton. And at the hall, we actually have a paperweight. It's a marble base with an iron eagle that was a gift from Alexander Hamilton to William Sr. And so when we have school groups come in, usually it's fourth grade, they do local history, I make each one of those kids hold this paperweight and say, you are holding something that Alexander Hamilton held. And of course, sure, I'm sure they learned about him in school, but they also know him because of the musical. So that really gives them a real kick. They really, really like that. So as I was talking about their relationship with Native people, the constables were so revered, which is really, this is probably my favorite part of the story, the history of the family, that the Native people actually presented the family with this handmade buckskin jacket. This is at the hall. Do you see this embroidery here? These are compasses. That is kind of to show their trade all over the world. That embroidery is made from porcupine quills. It's hand-dipped, oh my gosh, I'm losing my train of thought. Hand-dyed porcupine quills, and of course the dye was natural roots and berries and things. So this took, and these white stripes here with the red, those are all porcupine quills entangled here. Now, we had Jessica Farmer, who's the curator of the Oneida Nation Museum, take a look at this. And we knew it was special, but she said, you really have no idea. there is fringe on this. I don't have a picture of the bottom, but all along the bottom of this, it's fringe that's wrapped in little porcupine quills. Wow. She said she has no idea how many hours it took. She said, but the more fringe on a garment and the more porcupine quills on a garment shows the more respect and how special this garment is. So this garment is over 200 years old, and we just recently had to have it restored, because for years before we knew any better at the museum, probably like 50 years ago, it was hanging on a hanger on the back of a door where people could touch it. And so not anymore. If you can see, it's now under glass.
Yeah.
So that's really how revered this is. And also at the hall, when they built the hall, there was a special room that William built, and back then they called it the Indian Room. Now we call it the Oneida Room. That room was for Native people. So any constable land in the country, Native people were allowed to travel without asking. They could camp, they could hunt, they could do whatever they wanted to. It was a way of showing friendship of the constables to them. And this room was the same thing. If they were traveling through the area and they needed a place to stay overnight or just get supplies, they could walk into that room. And there were bedrolls, supplies, and most importantly, hanging on the wall at all times, 2 loaded rifles. So if they could go out and hunt. And quite often they would go out and hunt, they would bring a couple extra deer and hang it on the back wall for the family. Because I think we know that nothing says trust in the North Country more than lending someone your rifles. So if there's no other evidence that the relationship was good, I think that alone is plenty of evidence. Now, William Sr., the most famous thing that he's known for is Macomb's Purchase. So Macomb's Purchase was a little less than 4 million acres in Upper New York State, which we pretty much know is now the Adirondack Park and up around. And here's the St. Lawrence River. Here's Lake Ontario. All of this. So back then, in around 1790, New York State was going bankrupt. Sound familiar? So they needed a lot of cash fast. They couldn't just sell a couple acres. They needed a bunch of cash fast. So they were going to sell this as one property. So there were only 3 families at that time who they knew could afford it. It was the Macombs, the Constables, and the McCormicks. Well, they were smart. They all knew each other. So they got together before the auction and they said, okay, why don't we buy this together and we'll split it up into thirds afterwards. But they didn't tell anybody that. So they came in and Macomb said, I'll give you 8 cents an acre. And the other 2 families went, oh, too rich for my blood. And they bought it for 8 cents an acre. 3,766,000 something, a little less than 4 million acres. Today it would be, that's about $32 million. So pretty good deal. Pretty good deal. So, because of Macomb's Purchase, we call William Sr. William the Purchaser. Okay? So he's William the Purchaser. So John the Surgeon was his father, and William Sr. is William the Purchaser. Okay. William Constable Jr. This is 2nd generation. This is William the Purchaser's son. So after he graduated, he was in the family business. He traveled. He was going to go and kind of check out all the land that his father bought within the purchase. Well, he took a horse and carriage and got as far as Rome and went, oh, no roads? Okay. So he had to leave the carriage behind, and he had a horse, traveled up to the North Country. Now, in Constableville at that time, which was known as Shalerville, it was a very small rural farming community, so not a lot going on. There was this 300-acre plot that he stood and looked at, and the topography, it was not just thick forest, but there were open fields, so it had a little bit of everything. So he instantly fell in love with it. So he went back to his father and said, hey, Dad, there's this 300-acre plot that I want to take out of the purchase, and I just want to keep it for our family, and I really want to build a family summer home. And he did. This is Constable Hall, and there are 14 rooms in this, a small summer home, remember. It is built from locally sourced limestone. All this limestone is out of Talketville, New York. and it took 9 years to build. Now, a couple of reasons. The first being, you know, the North Country winters, lack of workers. Now, some Native Americans did help the family build it, but overall, it took 9 years to. And also, yeah, the War of 1812 kind of threw a little wrench in the works there too. So overall, it took 9 years. Now, during this time, he married his bride, Mary Eliza McVicker. They had grown up in New York together, and they got married. They ended up having 5 children, and she's very, very interesting. She came from a wealthy family, and this was going to be her summer home. This is the veranda. This is the back of Constable Hall. It's really interesting because it almost looks like a plantation in a way, but it's actually designed after an Irish manor home that the family had in Ireland. Now, this up here, you can see that this is painted white. This is actually incorrect. We're going to take down the plaster here so it looks more like up here. So it's going to look more like an Irish manor home than a plantation when we get done. The building's over 200 years old, so you gotta understand that we're constantly having to do renovations, especially with masonry, and it's very tough to get good historic masons up here. So that's always a challenge with a historic building. Come on. There we go. This is another shot of the front of Constable Hall again, decorated for Christmas. Inside the hall, this is an oil lamp. This lamp was a gift from Mary Eliza's parents, Turchi and William, on their wedding, and inscribed on there is Latin, God will provide. This is the drawing room. I love the lighting in this room. Each room in the hall, when you come to see it next season, I did not ask that. Has anyone here been to Constable Hall? I should have asked that. Oh, thank you very much. The rest of you, I'll plan on seeing you this summer. When you come to the hall, you'll notice, look at these ceilings. Every ceiling in every room is different. Here's another picture of the drawing room, and you'll see different things in the museum. For instance, this tea set, this was Mary Eliza's tea set. So this tea set's over 200 years old. This desk back here, that is a traveling desk. It's called traveling. It's hilarious. It's a huge thing. It's on casters, and it's got 2 big brass handles on it. That was William the Purchaser's travel desk for when he went overseas, because apparently that's considered portable back then. A couple of handles, and they'd have a couple of guys haul it up to the ocean liners because that's how they would go. So very so portable. This is the formal dining room. Again, look at that ceiling. Isn't that gorgeous? And this other artifacts you'll see at the hall from all the different generations. By the way, 6 generations of constables lived in the home continuously. The 5th generation, Casimir Constable, he was also an import-export, so he would travel all over the world, and he would pick up things at auctions. And this china that you see on the table, that was china from the Napoleon Bonaparte family. Napoleon Bonaparte III, who is Napoleon's nephew, pretty much had a fire sale back in the 1800s and sold everything. And this is one set of probably 20 other sets, because it was Napoleon. He lived large. He had probably a set for every meal, every holiday. So we're lucky enough to have a set. This sideboard back here is a Chippendale sideboard. There's so many different treasures like this in the hall. This is the library. There's over so many books here, over 200 years old. The library is basically Casimir Constable's library. He was educated in Harvard. He was an engineer, and he is responsible for many of the artifacts and things, furniture in the hall. This is a view from the outside. This is the carriage house. Now our carriages consist of a golf cart and riding lawnmowers. This is the back of the hall you see there, and this is the servants' quarters. So at one point this did hold servants. We think that the bottom was more like the first floor was more like a bunkhouse for when they were building the hall. And then later Casimir Constable turned the first floor into a working blacksmith shop. Now the constables, when they lived there, they did, the first generation, or second generation, they did have servants. They weren't hurting at this point. They had a nanny, they had a cook, they had a butler, they had a maid. They probably had 5 or 6 servants. 2 of them they brought over from Ireland, and then a few from New York City, where they originally lived. This is a shot of the garden from the back. Now right now it's amazing because you see this grass path here. We have done so much to the garden the past couple of years. This is all now crushed stone paths.
Oh, okay.
And that's how it was originally, because we're always trying to renovate the hall back to our period of interpretation. So the period of interpretation is from 1819 to 1900. So when you walk into the hall, that's what you're going to see. There's nothing newer than 1900 in the hall. This garden was planted the year after the hall was completed in 1820. This garden is one of the oldest, let's see, there's a phrase. It's one of the oldest continually tended gardens in North America. Now there are several historic gardens all over in other houses, but there were times where the house would be abandoned and the garden would go. This has never happened the entire 203 years now. We have 25, last year we had 25 volunteer gardeners, and in each, as you see, it's a triangle pattern. If you look from above, the paths are in the shape of a St. Andrew's cross. So every part of a garden is a triangle. So we call them our triangle tillers. And they're all volunteer, and it's their job on their own time. They weed, they plant, they do what they can for their triangle. And we couldn't operate the garden without them. They're really valued volunteers. All right, so showed you a little part of the hall. So here's the sad part. This is a portrait of William Jr. And by the way, we call him William the Builder because he built the house. Okay, so the house was ready to be almost completed. They were going to put the top stone on the front steps. Now this weighed tons and tons and tons. There were a team of oxen that had to drag this stone. It was getting ready to be set, and it shifted and it fell. And when you come to the hall, there's a huge crack in it, and it goes all the way down like 2 steps, you can see. Well, unfortunately, William was injured. He injured his leg, and so for the next 2 years, he would be confined to a wheelchair, and then he died from an infection in 1821. And at this time, they had 5 young children, 4 little boys, and infant daughter, Anna, and the kids were all under 12 years old. Very, very, very sad. So here's where this guy comes in. So Mary Eliza, William's wife, she was very interesting because I told you she came from money, right? New York City money. This is supposed to be her summer house. Well, ladies, I don't know about you, but if I was in her position and seeing the North Country winters, and now I'm suddenly a widow, I would have called Daddy and said, okay, I'm coming back to New York and I'm living with you and I'm bringing the 5 kids. But Mary Eliza didn't do that. She stuck her, listen, we don't have letters explaining why she did this. We can only guess, but she said, nope, we're staying here. Not only is this going to be our summer house, we're going to live here full time with her children, to raise her children. I like to think that maybe she understood what this place meant to her husband and the family, and that this would be passed down to her children, but she made that decision to stay. And that really, I think that shows quite some character from her, in that, because she was brought up in wealth. Okay, it wasn't that bad. She had a lot of servants, but still, that's really, and if you know Constableville, it's pretty isolated out there. So that's where this gentleman comes in. So Clement Moore was actually Mary Eliza's cousin Okay, they grew up in New York together. The Constables, the Moores, and the McVickers all grew up in New York City together. So when William died, he had already been at the Hall a few times because not only were they cousins, they were very, very good friends. They were very close friends. So he had been at the Hall when William was alive. But after William died, he really felt it necessary to go up for at least 2 Christmases and spend Christmas with Mary Eliza and her children. And it is family constable lore, and I really do believe we have some examples to back it up, that Constable Hall was part of the inspiration for him to write "'Twas the Night Before Christmas." So Moore was a liberal arts professor and a published poet who at that point lived in New York City and Troy. He split his time between the two. So in 1822 is when he wrote the poem, and for his children as a Christmas surprise. So again, you just heard Stephen, right? That family lore says that he wrote it for Mary Eliza, but there's always conflicting reports. So each family has their own lore, and we think that's wonderful. You know, I mean, as all your family has family stories, it's really, really the same thing, but we can only kind of go on what we can prove and what's been written, again, what can be proven. So he wrote A Visit from St. Nicholas for his children. Now, the poem made the rounds around the family and friends. And in 1823, someone, without his knowledge, sent it to the Troy Sentinel. So last year was the 200th anniversary of the publication of the poem. He was not happy. He didn't think it was a serious enough piece of literature for him to have his name attached to it. So for the longest time, he denied it, but his children finally encouraged him to claim authorship and include that poem in a book of poems that he was going to publish in 1837, and finally he did claim authorship of the poem. So again, the Constable family stories handed down through generations. Several passages kind of match the hall perfectly. All right, so this is one of the many windows in the hall. You see little latches. These are interior shutters. I have to tell you, growing up as a child, this section always bothered me. He tore open the shutters and threw up a sash. But if he's doing that from the inside, it would be sash, then shutters. Well, no, because in this house, there are 42 sets of interior wooden shutters. Ask me how I know, because I get to open and close them all season long. So these were especially common in the North Country for to keep the heat in. They weren't necessarily a thing down in the city. Now in Troy, we don't know if he had interior shutters. Unfortunately, there are no pictures of the inside, and that house was torn down years ago, so we don't know. But I think that's a pretty good example. This is a guest bedroom. So the guest bedroom is where Clement would have stayed when he was here. So this was Adirondack Life magazine back in '88. They came and did a photo spread of the hall. And I want you to pay close attention to this window right here. You see this window? You can see the upper shutters are closed here. So this is the guest bedroom that you just saw right here. This is the window. So here's the passage. When out on the lawn there arose such a clatter, I sprang from my bed to see what was the matter. Away to the window I flew like a flash, tore open the shutters and threw up the sash. The moon on the breast of the new fallen snow gave a luster of midday to objects below. So this is how attention to detail oriented my curator is, Peter Hayes. He's also a Lewis County historian. On Christmas Eve, he came up to this window. Yes, he did, to see where the moon was. And sure enough, he could see the moon outside this window. It was a beautiful snowy night, so that was another, ticked a little box in his mind that's another little bit of evidence there. This is the window looking out. Now these are actually newer trees, so there are probably no trees here. So this is probably what he was talking about, you know, watching the reindeer and Santa in a sleigh out here. Okay, here's another one that I love. So the constables had a live-in Dutch gardener / maintenance guy. His name was Peter, the Dutch spelling, P-I-E-T-E-R, who just happened to fit perfectly the description of Santa. So if you didn't know this, this description of Santa, right? The jelly full of belly and the pipe and the beard and the red cheeks and nose, that description was Clement Moore. That was the first description of a Santa that we know today. Now, of course, St. Nicholas has been a thing forever, but he was described differently. He really was. Yeah, he was an old guy with white hair, but much differently. He normally has robes on and a crown in other pictures. So when Clement wrote this is now the most famous and the description of Santa Claus and the reindeer that we are used to. And by the way, 'Twas the Night Before Christmas is the most widely read piece of literature in the world, by the way. Yeah. So, Peter the Dutch gardener, he fit all of this description. His eyes, how they twinkled, his dimples, how merry, his cheeks were like roses, his nose like a cherry, and the pipe, all of it. Now, as you probably know, these are just a few instances of artwork that has been inspired by the poem. By the way, this picture right here, this is all Constable Hall merchandise over here, by the way. I'm going to hawk it for just a second. This book is available over here. But yeah, so many different instances of art that took inspiration from this poem. Okay. Author controversy. We don't talk about Livingston, but we're going to talk about Livingston. All right, so Moore's connection with the poem had been questioned by most notably Professor Donald Foster, who used textual content analysis and external evidence to argue that Moore could not have been the author. Foster believes that Major Henry Livingston Jr., a New Yorker, should be considered the chief candidate for authorship. And the Livingston family has been saying that forever. And what's interesting is that Livingston was actually a distant cousin to Moore and Mary Eliza. So here's some more family drama, right? However, it's been countered by document dealer and historian Seth Keller, who once owned one of Moore's original manuscripts of the poem. So this has gone back and forth. As a matter of fact, in Troy, New York, for a few years, they actually had mock trials set up.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, it's very, very funny. These people are serious about their poem. Now, so that is the basic history of how we're connected to 'Twas the Night Before Christmas. So when I came here I've been director for a year and a half. My mission now is to really push the narrative that the poem was inspired by the hall, because I truly believe that's how we're going to save our museum. Not that it's in danger, it's really not, but that's how we're going to move forward. Because it's the most widely read piece of literature in the world, that's where we're going to get interest from people. And I truly believe that if they come to the hall just because of that, they're going to walk through and they're going to learn all these other different things about Alexander Hamilton, about George Washington, all of these things that they're going to be hooked in spite of coming because of the poem. So I'm really dedicated to that. So now we're gonna fast forward through the final generation that lived in the house. So this is John Constable. We call him John the Preservationist. So John came back from World War II, and he had 2 children at that point. He would have 4. He had his business in Watertown. So at that point, the family money had pretty much dissipated, and he was on his own. So he came back from World War II, Watertown to Constableville. That was an hour 15, hour and a half. It just was not practical to have his family live there. Plus, the money had really gone. And at this point, the estate was now, it was originally 300 acres, because they were also a working dairy farm for a while too. They really diversified. Back to when John had it, it's down to 17, which is what the association is on now. It's 17 acres, okay? He knew he was gonna have to sell it. And it broke his heart, but he didn't know what else to do. And so he got a couple of offers, really good offers, but these people would not guarantee that they would not alter the hall. So he waited and he waited and he waited. And thank goodness, oh come on, don't do that to me. So he was unsuccessful finding a buyer who would not alter it. So just when he thought time was running out, his prayers were answered by these three people. So friends of the hall knew what John was going through, and they really wanted to help him. And so they approached Harry and Mary Lewis. They were not the Lewis County Lewises, they were in printing. And then Harry's sister, Grace Cornwell, they were all came from money. They agreed to purchase the hall in 1947. They took a year and a half to restore it, and then they gifted it to the community as a nonprofit museum, the Constable Hall Association. So this year we celebrated our 75th anniversary as a nonprofit house museum, and that is why we call John the Preservationist, because he could have sold it to the highest bidder, and they could have bulldozed it. They also could have made it into a restaurant like Greystone, which makes me very sad, because that will never be back to what it was, because they had to damage or get rid of things interior for the kitchen set. So that will never be what it once was. So John, the preservationist, truly really thought of the family, and he knew how important it was to his family history, of course, but he also knew how important it was to state, local, and national history. So it became a house museum in 1949 and placed on the National Register of Historic Places. The constables today. So right before I came up, you saw, I mean, the family is still so involved. The cousins, everybody. Stephen is very involved. There are other cousins who come once a year. The Cooks were here over the summer. Berengaria was here, and all these other people. So we get cousins coming to the hall all the time. It's really wonderful. But the constable kids today, so these are all John the Preservationist kids, all four of them. And they are all involved in the hall. So this is John. John has been a past president of the association. This is Jane. This is Mary. Mary is the president now. And this is Martha. So they're all very involved in the hall today. And it's really interesting, especially I work with Mary a lot because she's the president, and every once in a while I'll catch her by myself and ask her questions, and when she would tell me stories about how it just killed her father to have to sell the house. She remembers the anguish he went through, but John continued for the rest of his life having connection with the hall and helping with the hall, and he was so proud and happy that it ended up becoming a house museum. And many of the relatives have also given back family furniture, family mementos, and artifacts for the hall. So Merry Christmas, everybody. And thank you. And right now I'm going to open it up to questions if anybody has any questions about anything. Yes.
About like the garden and the walkway, what types of records are available in the house, so you knew that they had to be a stone path, and any other records that you were able to access?
There are photos, believe it or not. There are very early photos of the garden, and there are in different paperwork from like Casimir, and back then Casimir was fourth generation. He ran the hall from 1886 to 1905, I believe. So he was the engineer who most of those books in the library were his. So he kept very good records. Other people, not so much, unfortunately. But so it's things like that. There's a lot of paperwork of different things and photos. Actually, right now, the past couple of years, the garden has gone through a remarkable restoration with those stone paths. And also there was, now I always forget what the difference between blackthorn and buckthorn, the hedges. One of them was originally from Ireland. So one of them was brought over and we had hedges along the garden. But then another invasive species took over. So we basically had to rip all of it out, unfortunately. And this fall, we're going to replant it. So right now the garden has no hedges, but it will. Next year we're replanting them because again, we're really trying to get it back to the way it was originally. And right now about 80% of the plants in the garden are the plants that would have been there in the 1820s, 1830s. So our goal is to get as close to 100% as possible. So that's the goal. Yes.
You might have said this, but when they first came over, like for instance, when they were buying all that land, what was the source of their revenue?
It was from import-export.
Oh, they made that much money on import-export.
They did. And then once they bought that land also, then they immediately went to Europe and started selling it.
Yeah.
And so if you notice around New York State, there's these different French pockets and Dutch pockets of things. That's why. And what's interesting is that land was kind of surveyed, but so I mean, quite often somebody would say, "Oh, this is supposed to be my land," and they ended up with like 40,000 acres too few or something. It was it was kind of nebulous. As a matter of fact, during the French Revolution, there was a sect of French people who actually bought land, I forget exactly where in the purchase, with the plan for it to become the new France. Wow. Right? They were just going to leave France and they were going to start their own colony, right? Because what they were thinking was, it's the same hemisphere, right? And they thought, oh, okay, well, we can grow it. No. Sure, but much different land. I mean, most of it was thick forest, which they couldn't deal with, so they bought all this land, but ultimately that didn't happen, so they didn't come over. So that kind of, I believe that land is small French pockets, but it didn't turn out the way it was supposed to.
Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome. I saw some, yes.
Okay, with the garden, at one point, did they also have like an herb and spice garden?
Yes, there is actually a triangle of herbs there that they used for cooking.
Cooking or medication?
Yep, exactly. And right now, our master gardener is Gina Millette. She's fantastic. We've got everything is labeled on little stones. Now that's not how it would have been back then, but so that you can see that there's sage, basil. So it's all kind of labeled. But just so many different varieties of herbs in this one big triangle.
I got another question. Okay, with Constable Hall, is in Constable, New York, right?
Constableville.
Constableville.
Mm-hmm.
How close is that to Boonville?
10 minutes. 6 miles.
Years ago, when Boonville had their tornado, no damage?
Nope. And Turin had a tornado, which is closer. No damage, thank God. I was actually at the hall when that happened, when the warning happened, and so I went right in the basement, and for an hour we were like, I couldn't have been safer because it was, limestone building. Mm-hmm. I was fine, but the veranda, everything could have gone, but no, we were, thank goodness.
6 miles to the west of Boonville? Where's Constableville? Or
North.
Northwest?
Yeah. I saw a question, yes.
Any of the flowers in the garden original? I'm probably not, but.
I don't know. I'm going to say probably not. But we've still tried to. Well, that's interesting. I don't know.
They could be.
They could. Yeah, they certainly could be, I suppose, right? But I'm not sure. That's a good question. See, I love question and answer series because that means now I get to go back to my gardener and ask that question, so I'll know for next time. Yes.
Well, last time I was up there, they used to have a lot of poppies.
Oh yes, poppies in June, like for Father's Day, a couple weeks before. They're glorious. Oh my gosh, they're so
And,
beautiful.
and that picture didn't have any poppies.
Yeah, that was taken later in the summer. Poppies last for about a month.
Oh.
Not even. It's like you've got to be there for the first 2 weeks of June, and then they're gone. But then you've got these other, the way it was planted, and I think it was probably planted that way to begin with too. It's like you've got poppies first, and then these. So something's always blooming, all the way to like the end of September. So every time you go, it's still beautiful, even though the poppies are gone or something else is gone. Yes, sir.
Is the museum open now?
It is not. So that is part. So we do have separate events that happen. Part of our problem is we don't have restrooms because they didn't have restrooms inside the houses back then. Our restrooms are in the basement and they're outdoor facing. One was the wine cellar and the other one was, I forget what it was. But those are public restrooms, but because they're outward facing, the pipes freeze in the winter, so we have to turn the water off. So my next big project, and I've been working on it since like I said, I've been here a year and a half, is we're going to figure out a way to winterize those bathrooms, because it makes absolutely no sense that we can't have restrooms and events there for the twice a night before Christmas. As a director, it makes me insane. So hopefully next year. Now we do have events, like for instance, the Sunday before Christmas, we're having an old-fashioned Christmas. We're having sleigh rides around. We're having hot cocoa and cider and Christmas caroling on the veranda, but there's no restrooms. There's a gas station 2 minutes down the road they let us use. But so in the future, hopefully, I've been writing some grants and things. We're going to change that so that we can continue year-round.
What's this? Oh, sorry.
Go ahead.
What's the season then?
We open around the end of May, and usually close for good the end of and around Halloween.
Okay.
But again, hopefully next year. So if you go to our, we have a great up-to-date Facebook page. We're also constablehall.org. Hopefully next year, if you keep up with that and sign up for the mailing list. I only group email people like once every 2 weeks just to let you know what's going on in the hall. If you want to know, and you can keep updated on what's going on. Yes, sir.
Is there a copy of the 1837 poem in that Constable House or Hall?
There is not. So, more family lore says that they had an original. I think there are 2 or 3 in existence right now that Moore wrote himself. Now, I have no evidence to back this up, but I firmly believe that somewhere in that hall there is a copy. Because years ago, we see people talking about it. But again, because you go through so many directors, you go through so many versions of the boards, sometimes depending on who's a good note taker and who isn't, you see these little clues. So it would not surprise me if one did pop up.
Have they gone through all the books in the library to see if it's tucked in one of the books?
Indeed, yes. As a matter of fact, we just inventoried all the library books this summer, and there's nothing in there. But you also have to remember that we have 4 constable children left, and Peter was just at Jane's house, our curator, last winter to go through some, because they also have family books and things still, right? Because they're living, they've been passed down to them like anybody else, and most of the children, when they're gone, they will donate all that stuff back to the hall when they pass. Jane had Peter over for lunch, and Peter was going through things, and he opened a book, and this pen and ink letter fell out, and it was a letter from Clement Moore to the family, dated 1837. So I'm pretty sure we have it. We have one. We've gotta find it. Yeah. How we doing on time? We good?
We're good.
Anybody else? Yes.
What's the time of that, open house in December, on the 22nd?
1 to 4.
1 to 4, thank you.
1 to 4. Thank you. Now I have, I've got Constable Hall mugs up here. I have Christmas ornaments. This is a little book that has a little 'Twas a Night Before Christmas. I have actually a 'Twas a Night Before Christmas book up here, and I have a board book for toddlers, which is gorgeous because they can't destroy it. And I also have a book up here called the Constables, the first family in the Adirondacks, because they had McCombs purchase the family, and especially the women. They were the first women to hike in the Adirondacks, and the first family. Although it makes me laugh because they had servants, so basically they would have the servants go up and make the camp, and then they would come up and camp. So I like to say the constable servants were the first hikers, but the constable family was. So this is all for sale up here. I want to thank everybody and go to constablehall.org, and please come visit me this summer. I would really love to see you. Remind me to sign you. Thank you.